For many Sikhs, bravery on the battlefield was in itself an honourable act. In a letter home, a soldier fighting on the Somme wrote, "It is quite impossible that I should return alive. Don't be grieved at my death, because I shall die, arms in hand, wearing the warrior's clothes. This is the most happy death that anyone can die."
Well, by the sheer numbers of the Sikhs that fought, I mean, 100,000 men is a great boost to any campaign. And on top of it, the bravery that these Sikh soldiers showed. Some campaigns at some battlefields, the complete regiments were exterminated because they fought to the end. One particular story of a German regiment seeing Sikhs who were fighting against them, running out of ammunition, and all of a sudden taking out their swords and marching towards them, you know, in a rage. So they actually commended this courage that they saw. The news of the Sikh soldiers fighting in the Eastern or the Western Front was covered by all the newspapers worldwide, French papers and American papers, mainly to show their flamboyant and colourful uniforms as well and appearance, but at the same time showing that the Sikh soldiers had rallied and come to fight under the banner of the British Empire. We've got some lovely images showing them marching through the streets and the local French crowds greeting them, throwing flowers. And this wasn't just because this was an Oriental figure marching through the streets of Paris, but really there was genuine love and genuine affection that, you know, these Sikh soldiers had come to save them.
In 1916, the Germans made audio recordings of Sikh prisoners of war captured on the Western Front and only handed the tapes to the British Library earlier this year. In this harrowing recording, 24-year-old Singh tells of his own tragic predicament.
अंग्रेजा की नौकरी की वो आदमी जुर्ग की लड़ाई जो आ गया उस आदमी नू जर्मनी ने कैद कर लिया कर दिया इथे और रह गया ताऊ आदमी मर जाऊगा.
Sikh soldiers were deployed in the harsh European trenches, like Jaimal Singh Johal's grandfather, Manta Singh.
The war broke in 1914. And his regiment was sent to Europe. The conditions were very rough. I mean, trenches, and of course in Europe, when the winter comes in, you can well imagine snow, rain, and mud everywhere. This is my grandfather, Subhadar Manta Singh. Looking at the size of the turban, it makes the soldiers look at least about 6 inches taller than his normal height. And next to him is Captain Henderson. His senior officer, Captain Henderson, got wounded, and he went to save him. And while he was bringing him back in a wheelbarrow, he got shot in his leg. And he was brought to hospital in Brighton.
A royal palace in Brighton, although designed with Eastern pretensions, was still an unlikely setting for a military hospital to house wounded Indian soldiers.
We're now approaching the music room, which is one of the most popular and one of the most vividly decorated rooms in the Royal Pavilion. And like many of the rooms in this building, it was used as a hospital ward for Indian men. Now, strikingly, this room is perhaps one of the less peaceful rooms in terms of its decoration, and one can see the rather vivid snakes and the dragons that adorn the wallpaper, etc. It's a very unusual place to have a hospital, and, you know, one can't help but wonder what the wounded men felt in their beds, lying down, looking up at these very vivid, almost sort of martial images they saw around them.
Over 4,000 injured Indian soldiers were brought to the Royal Pavilion, and many were surprised by the opulence of their new surroundings.
Certainly the letters we have from the Indian soldiers themselves indicate that they were very, very honoured by the fact that they were given space to actually recuperate in a royal palace as they saw it, which was also augmented by the fact that King George V made 2 visits here in January and August 1915.
The care the Sikh soldiers received in Brighton led to a strong sense of personal duty to King George V. In a letter home, one Sikh soldier wrote, "May God grant long life to the generous-hearted sovereign who has deigned to think of his humblest soldiers."
In the First World War, when this building was used as an Indian military hospital, this room was not used as a kitchen at all, but it was used as an operating theatre. And there were over 70 operations conducted here that we know of.
As a thank you for the manner in which the injured troops were looked after, a new gateway to the Royal Pavilion was donated by a Sikh Maharaja on behalf of the Indian people. But for Manta Singh, there would be no recovery at the hospital and no return to his homeland. Saving the life of his captain led to the tragic loss of his own in 1915.
My grandfather was only 27 years old, and of course leaving 2 small kids back in India was difficult for grandmother to bring them up.
The outcome of the First World War, the early stages of it, certainly without the Indian Army contribution, and of course Sikhs were a large part of that contribution, I think the war might have been very, very different. The Indian Army contingents arrived during the First Battle of Ypres, just in time and in just enough numbers to block the gaps. They certainly saved the British from what might have been an embarrassing retreat back to the Channel ports.
The Sikh and Hindu soldiers who died at the Royal Pavilion were cremated at this spot, just outside Brighton, now known as the Kshatri Memorial. They were all part of a death toll, which by the end of the conflict numbered over 9 million lives.